who just arrived freshly. Andreas Refsgaard, please come on stage and assume your spot. And while we're getting your card ready, let me just quickly introduce you. The time is really precious and you only have half an hour. He's an interaction designer, artist and teacher who has created the eye conductor that helps people to express themselves through music, using their eyes and facial expressions only. Very exciting sounding. He's switching between works with commercial projects with the Google Creative Labs and Carlsberg, and also more artistic installations. So without further ado, the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as was just said, my name is Andreas Refsgaard. I'm from Denmark, independent artist and teacher as well. And I'm going to talk about 4 things today. How I use inputs and outputs in the style of work I do, how I got interested in machine learning and how my approach is kind of playful, and then some experiences and examples of teaching with machine learning, and then also finally some resources for open source tools that can allow educators to get started with machine learning in a more or less easy and approachable way. So first of all, inputs and outputs. A lot of the work I do is about making novel and sort of fresh, not seen before, connections between an input and an output. And what do I mean by that? Essentially, it's just something that I use to control something else with. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. This is my final project from when I was a student myself. It's called Eye Conductor. And it's a musical interface that you play using your eyes and your facial expressions. Can we turn it up a bit? It's a musical instrument for people with physical disabilities that allows them to play by only using their eyes and facial gestures. This is a sequencer where if I look at one point for 2 seconds, then I insert a beat. Åbn munden. Another example, slightly more humoristic example, is this one. I call it Painting with Gossip, and it's an installation where you paint with the latest headlines from a Danish tabloid newspaper. So you can paint really artistic stuff, but the content is about, yeah, I'm not going to translate it. Are there any Danes around? Okay, oh, wow, okay. You'll know, don't tell anybody. Okay, and this is Video Painter. Also a painting app, but instead of painting with static layers, as you would typically do in Paint or in Photoshop, you paint with layers of video. About 2 years ago, I got super interested in machine learning, and typically you wouldn't associate machine learning and the thing I come from, which is interaction design. Typically interaction designers or designers overall, when they hear about machine learning, they do like this. It's because sometimes they think of machine learning as some sort of black box that not even the people who build the algorithms can truly understand what goes on inside them. And in some cases that might be true, like machine learning can be super complex, but there's another side to machine learning which I'll focus on. And I'll try to explain it with some examples where the stuff I do is simply to send like raw streams of data to a supervised machine learning algorithm and try to get it to recognize and distinguish a few different classes. And here's one example. Hey, I'm going to attempt to build a rock, paper, scissors classifier using processing, Wikinator and the leap motion in 1 minute. So first I have a processing sketch which sounds out the XYZ of all my 5 fingertips, which means that I'm listening for 15 input values. I only have 1 output, which is a classifier with 3 classes for rock, papers, and scissors. So now I'm ready to start the processing sketch. And first off, I'm going to train the rock. So the rock would look like this. And I'm going to start recording examples of the rock. Then I have the paper. Record some of those. And finally the scissors. Record some of those. And then I can train and I can run. So we have the scissors, the rock, the paper, the rock, scissors, rock, paper. So in a way, this is sort of flipping the paradigm. Like normally you think of machine learning as something where you need tons of data, you need very expensive computers, and you need to be an expert coder. But I try to make it as accessible as possible with free open source tools. This is Weakinator. I'll get back to that tool later on. So with machine learning, or more specifically with the branch I use, which is supervised machine learning, you can prototype without coding a lot, which can be very nice in teaching situations. You can get yourself or students to iterate much faster, like go from a basic idea and a proof of concept to the next more refined version of the project. You can also make systems where users can train and decide on the interactions, which I'll show some examples of later. And then finally, you can use super complicated inputs, such as raw streams of video or raw streams of audio, which if you have to code for those, that's extremely complicated. So again, like if you remember my statement about it's just something I use to control something else with, then with machine learning, it's quite easy and very fast to make these connections. And I'm going to show some examples of that. This is kind of a silly example. Again, I use this tool called Weakinator, and then I have a face, let me see here, I have a face tracker which tracks some points in my face. And then I simply just send the raw data to this Weakinator tool. And then in this case, I make a system that's able to detect what kind of facial expression I give it. And it's only, the video will show how I train it. It's speeded up a bit, but overall I think I train it for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. So let's have a look at it. So I set it up, I say a number of inputs I want to listen for, and then I start training. First I train a neutral expression, then I train an expression where I'm surprised, one where I look excited, one where I'm kind of sad, and then one where I'm flirty, I have like a kissing mouth. And then I test it out, and it works decently for the first classes, the neutral, the excited, and the surprised. But when I try to be flirty, it doesn't really pick it up. It thinks I'm neutral. And maybe it's a problem we have in Scandinavia, that being neutral and being flirty is the same. But from a technical point of view, it's also a very minor detail with the mouth. So instead of like having to like, oh no, it doesn't work, recode everything, I simply give it more examples. I give it examples in the edge cases where it doesn't work, and then it starts to pick it up. And now I think it has issues with sadness, so I give it more training data and let it run, and then it's actually able to pick it up. Okay. Here I also use face tracking to make a Photobooth that will only take pictures if my face looks like a prune. So you know a prune, sort of, or a sviske in Danish, and then it will take pictures if it sees me doing that. Otherwise it won't take pictures. Yeah, makes sense, right? Good for parties and weddings. Yeah, you end up with pictures like this. Okay, but of course it's not all just fun and games or silly experiments. Sometimes you need to get paid. So me and my former partner Lasse Korsgaard, also artist and interaction designer from Denmark, we got approached by Google Creative Lab in New York because we've been doing all these silly experiments with machine learning and also taking some of them to the browser. And they were interested in collaborating and making something, a website experience where you could train a system directly in the browser. It's called Teachable Machine, so people can try it out if they want to. Just Google Teachable Machine, search for it. And I'm going to show an example which I really like. It's a guy called Baron who posted this on Twitter, where he says, I use Teachable Machine to make Silicon Valley, HBO's Hot Dog Not Hot Dog app. Does anybody know of the sitcom Silicon Valley? There's apparently somebody making a Hot Dog Not Hot Dog app in that show. I think you can understand it even though you haven't seen it. Essentially what happens here is that this is the user, and the input is the user's webcam. And then he's able to give examples of 3 different classes, a green class, a purple class, and an orange class, and then associate those classes with an output. So again, we have this input-output model. And he came up with these specific inputs for the classes, and then as output, he selected speech. You can also select some other outputs, but he selected speech, and he trained it to recognize when there's a hot dog in the picture and when there's no hot dog in the picture. So let's see it.
Not hot dog. Not hot dog. Hot dog. Not hot dog. Hot dog. Not hot dog. Not hot dog. Hot dog. Not hot dog. Hot dog. Not hot dog. Hot dog. Not hot dog.
Look how happy he is, right? So one of the reasons why I think he's really happy is that he came up with this interaction. When we made the system, we didn't envision anybody making the hot dog, not hot dog application. Maybe we could have thought of that, but like he kind of came up with it, trained it in a few minutes, and made a proof of concept of something that is, of course, a bit absurd and a bit silly, but it was his creation. So in a way, it sort of shifts the power away from the designer to the user. This is another example of a machine learning project. It's made in collaboration with an American artist named Gene Kogan. I'll get back to him in a second. We made it at a hackathon in South Korea, and we call it Doodle Tones. You draw musical instruments on paper, and then an algorithm is trained to recognize sketches of a limited number of musical instruments. And then when the camera sees a particular instrument, it starts playing back music with that instrument, and then you can actually compose by just drawing on paper. Okay, let's move on. Then a funny thing happened a bit later. Airbnb saw our code. We put everything out online, and they made another tool with it, where instead of making music, they make actual HTML. So yeah, that's kind of interesting to see. Sometimes artists can be the unpaid research and development of big companies. It's a bit of a sidestep. I think I'll skip this one. It's a bit silly. Now I'll get into some stuff with using sound as an input, and then later on we'll get into the teaching with machine learning. So this is my former colleague Lasse, and him and me were very interested in using sound as an input for making interactions, and in this case for playing a game. So we trained an algorithm to recognize the sound of whistling and separate it from other types of sounds, and then had that control a game. Yeah. So we thought that was really funny, but we wanted to take it up one notch. So what if you play a game that's a bit more difficult, one that has way more types of interaction, so you need way more sounds, and you need to remember the sounds as well. So let's see that. Yeah, it becomes a very long game. Yeah, okay. So then we got asked by Kick Festival in Belgium to make something for kids with machine learning, and because we had already made these two very lo-fi prototypes, we thought, okay, we more or less know what to do. So we ended up making sound-controlled intergalactic teddy. This was the first version. It has now been set up in multiple places. The first version, you had to either clap or say "oh" to control the game, but later we set it up in Toronto at something called TIFF, and in that installation, kids themselves could train the two sounds. So they could give 20 examples of one sound, 20 examples of another sound, and then test it out and see if they were able to control the game. And sometimes it didn't work as well, like we on purposely decided in the first case to use two very different sounds. But I think it's a kind of interesting interactive experience where people themselves can sort of like train and see if they trained it well enough, and if they didn't, maybe pick something else and try to retrain. This is another example of a machine learning project called an algorithm watching a movie trailer, where we used an algorithm called YOLO 2 and a movie trailer called The Wolf for the Hollywood film The Wolf of Wall Street. And YOLO is able to recognize images, but not only what the image contains, but also where the stuff is at. So for instance, here's a person, here's a person, here's a person, here's some books, and then over here is a cell phone, apparently. And of course, that's not a cell phone, but on purpose, we limited the certainty threshold so it would make some wild guesses and get some things right. Like, for instance, these books, it's kind of impressive that it's able to pick those up, and something's wrong. It's not a cell phone, but if you look at a cell phone, it kind of like looks like a black box, and there's somewhat of a black box over here. So in a way, you kind of understand where it's coming from. And then we thought, let's delete everything that the algorithm cannot recognize and cut it all together. So it'll be the entire movie trailer seen from the perspective of this algorithm. And it looks like this.
My name is Jordan Belfort. The year I turned 26, I made $49 million, which really pissed me off because it was 3 shy of $1 million a week.
We're making a name for ourselves.
Nobody knows if the stock is going to go up, down, sideways, or in circles. You know what a fugazi is?
Oh, Fugazi. It's fake.
Yeah, fugazi, fugazi. It's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's a fairy dust.
Then we also made a version where it censors everything, and one only with the abstract bounding boxes. And then we run this algorithm through a lot of stuff. I really like when it makes mistakes. This is an image from a Norwegian artist called Daniel Pajda. And it gets the car, but it doesn't get the guy jumping in a cow skin, but also it doesn't have a category for that. So out of the 80 categories this model has, then kite is a pretty good guess, kind of poetic guess in a way. I really like those errors. A giraffe. And the last time I was in Berlin, I had some coffee. Okay. It was actually pretty good, the coffee. I thought it was a toilet. Okay. About teaching with machine learning, now I've been sort of teaching, like I'm not associated with any place in particular, but I've taught maybe 15 different places in Europe, festivals, conferences, but also universities, art schools. I taught a bit in Costa Rica, and I'm going to India next week to teach, sort of like bring machine learning to people who think they're not interested in machine learning. And it has some like really cool stuff. I think I mentioned some of this a bit earlier, but you can allow non-coders to build functional interactive prototypes. That's always a big hurdle. Like if you want to do something with coding, then some people are good at it, very interested and get it. Some people just go like, it's not for me, they get super frustrated. Of course there's ways to help that, but it is a hurdle. But with machine learning, you can allow people to train the interactions rather than code them, and that can get you pretty far, and people can do amazing stuff in very short time. So you can, in a way, sort of focus on creativity and coming up with novel ideas, rather than focus on technical skills. And you can come up with ideas and build them in less than an hour. I brought some examples of students who've done that, and then you can have a lot of fun. Sometimes if I have like maybe a 4-hour workshop, or even have like a 5-day workshop, one of the first things I do is that I show people one simple technique of using a webcam input and a classification system, and then I give them 1 hour to build a yoga classifier, a classifier that's able to figure out which yoga position somebody's making. I can't make any yoga positions, but you all know different ones, right? And then I also try to, like, if they then have a bit of technical skills, they can make it extra special, or they can just make the yoga classifier. And everybody's able to do that in 1 hour. I'm just going to show some fun examples of what people have been able to do in just 1 hour. So this is a very tall guy who I met in Lyon, and he made this yoga cat classifier. I think he was almost 2 meters tall, and then I love the fact that he, like, so this system just spits out like class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, and then if it's class 1, then it's one cat, if it's class 2, another cat, and so on. So pretty straightforward to make, but it's focused on like training the system and be creative. So I love that. This is a project from the Bartlett School of Architecture, where some students made this thing, snake yoga, where they do different positions, and then they sort of have to control this small ball, getting the squares. I also like that a lot. Here is a class of actually special students who had like some learning difficulties, but we made them also train stuff with machine learning. And a cool thing about this was that like a lot of these kids had difficulties concentrating, so they had to like really concentrate and really work together to get this working. That was fun. And then yeah, some other small examples of what people can do in an hour or a day. This is from CID, Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design, their summer school. Of course, it's kind of silly, but just like being able to make a proof of concept for something like that in an hour or so is really cool. This guy, like a weird system, he was a bit advanced. He made a chair in code, and then he's able to control that chair with his face. I really love that. This was actually a student who was mainly into typography, so like making his own fonts, and then he made something called a variable font, and we connected that with machine learning, so it would react not only to sounds, but the sound of blowing. So his font is over here. He spells out house, and then it's attached to a microphone and an algorithm that's trained to recognize the sound of blowing. this example, I think I'll skip this one. This is a musical example of like making music with drawings in sand, also from Copenhagen Institute of Interaction Design. So essentially you have a webcam looking down on this container with sand, and then different types of doodles are associated with different parameters in the music. It's a bit ambient, a bit abstract. And then when you clean it all off, they all go to zero. If you make the sand surface flat again, which is kind of nice. How much time do I have left? 3 minutes. Okay, I'll show this project. It's not a student project of mine. I just helped him out a bit. A guy called Bjørn Karman, a Danish guy, who took like all of these machine learning techniques and then brought them a bit into the physical world. So he made this small object, which is called Objectifier. It's able to, you plug any electrical device into it, and then it has a small camera, and then you can train it to be either on or off. So you have all of a sudden you can control a lamp to be on or off when something happens, the radio, the toaster, and so on. And here you see people training it.
Actually works really good. I don't need to train it that much.
Okay, I'm running a bit out of time. So getting started with machine learning, some of the tools. Weakinator is a really, really great tool. It has a graphical user interface. It doesn't do a lot of stuff on its own. I've never seen so many phones. Well, it's cool. Okay. So you have to connect it with some other software like Unity, which is a game engine, or Processing, which is a tool for people from design or art getting into coding. And then you can use Weakinator to do all the machine learning crunching for you without you having to code any of that. You just send these raw streams of data. So it's really, really nice. It's been out there for a while. Made by Rebecca Fiebrink, who's awesome. Then there's ml4a.github.io, which is mainly made and maintained by Gene Kogan, the artist that I made the Doodle drawing music app with. It's slightly more advanced and not for beginners. Some Python stuff and some open framework stuff. It's also a book that's now being translated into different languages, so that's definitely also worth checking out. But the thing I would actually encourage people to start with is this project, ml5js.org. It's a very, very friendly, as it says, friendly machine learning for the web. It takes some of the functionality that TensorFlow has, and now TensorFlow can run directly in JavaScript, but it makes it much more accessible, much more easy to get started with. So if I teach, I actually start out with this. It's super powerful, but easy to get into. And there's 1 minute left. Okay, then I'll end with this thing. It's kind of silly, but I think it'll take, maybe a minute, maybe less. So, okay, let's just run it. Sorry for showing that. I just wanted to show it because sometimes presentations should also be about stuff that didn't work out but was still a fun idea. And especially if you teach, then encourage people to make like weird experiments. They learn a lot from that. So that was my talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Andreas. That was amazing. Okay, this is the end of the session, but since we don't have another presenter, and if you're not rushing to the restaurant, then we can probably have a question or two.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Does anybody have a question? If not, Twitter was burning as well, so you probably want to get back to
sure.
some of those and reflect. Thank you very much for your attention, and enjoy your lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.